bounding main. For many a stormy wind shall blow ere Jack comes home again. Sailing, sailing over the bounding main. For many a stormy wind shall blow ere Jack comes home again.
The telegram that would send us 9,000 miles away from the Wicklow Hills arrived one summer day at Valclusa. Decades later, Mum could still remember what it said. Can you take group of Peace Corps volunteers to Santiago, Chile for a project to develop industrial cooperatives in urban slums? Stop. All expenses paid for you and family. Stop. It was signed Father Ted Hesburgh, Notre Dame, South Bend, Indiana. It took us 5 minutes to decide, Mum told me, and then your father went into Enniskerry to send a return cable to Father Hesburgh. 5 minutes to accept a 32-word job offer with an organization we knew nothing about in a country most of us had never heard of. Or perhaps it was just a practical decision. Dad needed a job. We flew to Boston, then took the train back to South Bend. Without reservations, we couldn't get compartments, so Mum, who was 8 months pregnant, traveled in a very cramped roomette with 18-month-old Valentina, while Dad sat up in the coach with the rest of us. Friends met us at the train station in South Bend and drove us to a house they found for us. We had barely settled in when Dad left for Purdue to begin training his volunteers. He was still there on the evening of August 31st when Mum went into labor. She called the doctor, who told her to go right to the hospital. Our next-door neighbor had been booked as a backup driver, so Mum called him next. He was a cautious driver, and he carefully steered the car through the deserted streets of downtown South Bend, dutifully stopping at red lights. Cecil, there's one more light between here and the hospital, Mum finally told him. If it's red and there are no cars, I'd suggest you run it. Fortunately, the light was green, and when he pulled up in front of the emergency room, Mum jumped out of the car and rushed inside. She ignored the nurses at the desk who wanted her to fill out the admissions form, got onto the elevator, and started undoing her buttons before she even got to the delivery room. This was her 8th child, and she knew when time was running out.
Just in time, I found you just in time. Before you came, my time was running low.
The baby arrived 15 minutes later, just before the doctor. Dad returned from Purdue long enough to see his newest son and to purchase 4 more trunks. Then he flew on to Santiago. Mum swung right into postpartum packing, filled the 8 trunks, and placed some special orders. A few weeks later, in the middle of November, 5 family friends in 5 cars drove Eleanor, Andrew, Mia, Bridget, Cece, Rory, Valentina, and Justin to get the boat train. At the dock in New York City the next day, we were reunited with our 8 steamer trunks, a new refrigerator, automatic washing machine, and 4 cases of disposable diapers. Mom, after all, had a 10-week-old infant and a 19-month-old toddler, along with several bedwetters. Not mentioning any names. We were sailing with the Grace Line, which advertised casual cruising to the west coast of South America, on the Santa Isabel, designed for travelers preferring a carefree, casual life on shipboard. When the ship set sail that Friday afternoon, November 16, 1962, there were 27 passengers on board, 8 of them judges. When we made our grand entrance to the dining room that first evening, there must have been a collective sigh from the other 19 passengers, whose image of casual cruising suddenly gave way to visions of food fights every evening. However, as the meal progressed, and we not only showed no signs of rambunctiousness, but the older children dutifully took charge of the care and feeding of the younger siblings. The tension, no doubt, eased up. The journey began pleasantly enough, and passengers were congratulating each other that evening on how seaworthy they were. By the second day out, however, we hit some rough seas off Cape Hatteras, and one by one, people became seasick. Mom traveled from one sick bed to another in our adjoining staterooms, checking on all of us until she couldn't stand it anymore and took to her own sick bed. The stewardess and the doctor had their hands full that night. The ship's itinerary took it from New York City down the eastern coast of the United States, through the Panama Canal, then down the western coast of South America. It was scheduled to stop in Haiti, but this route took it too close to Cuba, whose missile crisis had only just ended, so the ship was rerouted farther north. For the first 2 days, all 7 children accompanied Mom everywhere she went. People must have thought I was a terribly devoted mother to always have my children with me, she told me years later. But I was just afraid I'd lose track of you if you weren't in my sight all the time. Some of the passengers apparently felt that her devotion went too far. On our 3rd day at sea, a woman approached us at dinner. She'd been sitting at a nearby table with 3 other passengers and had observed the judges dining together at every meal. "We think you should enjoy 1 meal each day away from your children," she informed Mom. "So we've spoken to the stewardess and made arrangements for her to serve the children dinner in the cabin each evening, and we'd like you to join us at our table." From that evening on, the steward and stewardess served us sandwiches, fruit, and ginger ale each evening in the cabin, while Mom dined in peace and quiet in adult company. One night, one of her table companions came in to dinner a little bit after the others and told Mom she had just passed the cabin and stopped to check in on the children, who were all fine. In fact, they were having a great fight.
A great fight.
A great fight.
Oh, okay.
Great
with a P or a T?
With a P.
G-R-A-P-E.
A great fight. Those were splendid affairs, those great fights, and the highlight of each evening's dining experience for us. We would jump on the furniture, pelting each other with grapes.
Oh.
The purple ones were particularly fun since they made a much more satisfying sound when they found their target. We went through the Panama Canal, which I expected to be a very dramatic experience, with the boat rising and falling sensationally as we went through the locks. Instead, we went through most of it during the night, so there wasn't much left to see in the morning. The walls of the canal looked dirty and rusty when the water was at its lowest point. The journey to the top of the lock was so slow, it took 8 hours to get through the entire canal, but I was thoroughly bored. I actually was in Panama about 9 years ago, and we had a visit at the Canal Commission, and I remember sitting there looking at the ships thinking, I was on one of those ships, and I can see why I was bored, because it just was so slow. We celebrated Cece's 5th birthday the second week on board. Andrew served as her front man and went around the ship telling everyone it was his sister's birthday. There was a party for her that evening in the dining room, and she received many gifts, including a check and a card from fellow passengers, Congressman and Mrs. Daniel Flood of Pennsylvania. He chaired the House Armed Forces Appropriation Committee and was, according to my mother, ostensibly reviewing American military installations. Years later, he would be implicated in the abscam scandal.
Oh, God.
I actually have his obituary, which I don't know, he must have died about 8 or 10 years ago.
Oh, more than that.
Well, no, I think it was since I started writing the book,
was
which
it?
is 10 years ago, and so I had clipped it out, just thought, he's in my book.
Oh.
After 3 eventful weeks at sea, we arrived in country.
Many a stormy wind shall blow.